Get ready to dive into the week's hottest TSX stocks. We're breaking down 13 game changers, monitored by NorthFlow Finance AI, for the week of May 25th. Welcome to our weekly review segment, where we're taking a closer look at stock number 1 of 13, THX.V, which triggered a signal on May 25, 2026. This signal was detected when the stock was trading at $1.39. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal is a bullish indicator that suggests a potential trend reversal, and at the time, it indicated that the stock was gaining momentum, with the volume surge of 34.8% being a key factor. The Relative Strength Index, or RSI, was at 62.7, which is not overly extended, leaving room for further upside. This signal combination is often seen as a buying opportunity, as it can indicate a shift in market sentiment. This week, the stock declined 2.2%, opening at $1.37, reaching a high of $1.40 and a low of $1.28, before closing at $1.34. Despite the decline, the stock is still holding above its recent lows, which could be seen as a validation of the original signal. The fact that the stock was able to bounce off its lows and close above $1.30 is a positive sign. Recently, there's been a lot of buzz around undiscovered gems in the Canadian market, and THX.V could potentially be one of them. This renewed interest in Canadian stocks could be a catalyst for the stock's price, and this week's decline may be a buying opportunity for investors looking to get in on the ground floor. Looking ahead to next week, viewers should watch for the stock to hold above its recent lows and for any further volume surges that could indicate a continuation of the uptrend. If the stock can break above $1.40, it could be a sign of further upside potential. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a closer look at CPX.TO, a stock that caught our attention when a signal was detected on May 26, 2026. This signal was triggered by a specific combination of technical indicators that we'll break down in a moment. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal is a powerful indicator that suggests a potential trend reversal or continuation, and in this case, it was accompanied by a significant volume surge of 362.2%, which is a strong confirmation of the signal. At the time, the RSI was at 68.4, indicating that the stock was in a bit of an overbought territory, but the signal still suggested a potential buying opportunity. The entry price at the time was $69.96, and we were interested to see how the stock would perform in the following days. This stock had a great week, gaining 7.0%. It opened at $66.04, reached a high of $70.65, and a low of $65.86, closing at $70.64. This performance is a strong validation of the original signal, as the stock continued to trend upwards despite being in overbought territory. The stock's ability to break through the $70 mark is a positive sign, and we'll be watching to see if it can sustain this momentum. There was some negative news this week, as one of the analysts downgraded Capital Power Corporation, which could potentially put some pressure on the stock. However, the stock's weekly performance suggests that investors are not too concerned about this downgrade, at least not yet. The market seems to be focusing on the company's fundamentals and technical indicators rather than this single downgrade. As we look ahead to next week, viewers should watch for any potential pullback or consolidation, as well as the stock's ability to hold above the $70 mark. We'll also be keeping an eye on the overall market sentiment and how it affects CPX.TO. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a look at DPM.TO, a stock that caught our attention when a signal was detected on May 26, 2026. This signal was triggered by a combination of a moving average golden cross and a significant volume surge, which is always an interesting development. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal is a pretty bullish indicator, suggesting that the stock's trend is shifting upwards and that there's increasing investor interest, which was the case on May 26 when the signal was detected, with the RSI at 61.8 and volume surging by 306.6%. This indicated a potential buying opportunity, with the entry price at $47.48. At the time, it seemed like DPM.TO was poised for a move upwards. This week, however, DPM.TO declined by 0.2%, not exactly the kind of momentum we were hoping for after that strong signal. It opened at $46.38, reached a high of $48.30, and a low of $44.40, before closing at $46.30. Despite this decline, the stock did show some resilience, bouncing off its lows, which could be seen as a validation of the original signal, but overall, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The weekly performance doesn't entirely confirm the bullish signal we saw last week. Dundee Precious Metals recently posted some high-grade results from their Wedge Zone Deep prospect, which is definitely a positive development for the company, and it's possible that this news helped support the stock price despite the overall decline. This kind of exploration success can be a big driver of investor interest, and it's likely that the market is waiting to see how this plays out. Looking ahead to next week, viewers should keep an eye on whether DPM.TO can build on this positive news and start to trend upwards again, and also watch for any further updates on the Wedge Zone Deep prospect. We'll be monitoring the stock's progress closely to see if it can regain its momentum. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a look at stock number 4, Moon.V, where a signal was detected on May 26. This signal was triggered by a moving average golden cross, combined with a significant volume surge, which is a pretty powerful indicator of potential upward momentum. The MA golden cross, as you know, occurs when the short-term moving average crosses above the long-term moving average, indicating a shift in the trend, and when you combine that with a volume surge of 250.7%, it's a pretty strong signal that something's moving. At the time, the RSI was at 58.7, which is not overly extended, so there was still room to run, and the entry price was $9.95. This signal suggested that Moon.V was poised for a potential breakout, and the volume surge indicated that there was significant interest in the stock. This week, Moon.V gained 7.7%, opening at $9.94, reaching a high of $10.82, and a low of $9.94, before closing at $10.7. This performance is a pretty strong validation of the original signal, as the stock has continued to trend upward. The fact that it was able to break above $10 and hold that level is also a positive sign. The stock's ability to hold its gains and close near its high for the week is also a good indicator of its strength. In recent news, Blue Moon Metals, the company behind Moon.V, has made a significant announcement regarding the Nussir project in Norway, which has likely contributed to the stock's strong performance this week. The approval of the final investment decision for the project's construction is a major milestone, and it's likely that this news has helped to drive investor interest and confidence in the stock. As we look ahead to next week, viewers should watch for whether Moon.V can continue to build on its momentum, and whether the stock can break out above its recent highs. We'll also be keeping an eye on any further news or updates from the company, particularly with regards to the Nussir project. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a look at Eldorado Gold Corporation, ticker symbol ELD.TO, where a signal was detected on May 26, 2026. This signal caught our attention as we continue to monitor the stock's performance. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal indicated a potential bullish trend, with the short-term moving average crossing above the long-term moving average, coupled with a significant increase in trading volume, which was up 223.9%. At the time of the signal, the RSI was at 61.9, suggesting the stock was in a relatively neutral position, but the volume surge and MA Golden Cross hinted at a possible uptrend. This signal suggested that investors were becoming more optimistic about the stock's prospects, leading to increased buying pressure. This week, Eldorado Gold Corporation gained 5.2%, opening at $44.26, reaching a high of $47.45, and a low of $42.83, before closing at $46.58. This performance seems to validate the original signal, as the stock has continued to trend upwards. The stock's ability to hold its gains and close near its high for the week is a positive sign, suggesting that the uptrend may continue. The overall trend is still bullish, and we're seeing the stock make new highs. There's been some positive news surrounding Eldorado Gold Corporation, with the company looking like a good investment opportunity, and it's also going ex-dividend soon, which could attract more investors. This news may have contributed to the stock's weekly gain, as investors become more optimistic about the company's prospects. The upcoming dividend payment could also provide a near-term catalyst for the stock. As we move forward, viewers should watch for continued momentum and whether the stock can break through any resistance levels. We'll also be keeping an eye on the company's fundamentals and any further news that may impact the stock's price. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a closer look at stock number 6 of 13, FSV.TO, where a signal was detected on May 26, 2026. This signal caught our attention as it presented a unique opportunity for potential growth. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal indicated a significant shift in the stock's trend, with the short-term moving average crossing above the long-term moving average, accompanied by a substantial increase in volume of 177.2%. At the time, the RSI was at 68.0, suggesting the stock was approaching overbought territory. This combination of factors suggested a potential upward momentum in the stock. This week, FSV.TO gained 1.4%, opening at $182.36, reaching a high of $191.93, and a low of $179.63, before closing at $184.82. This performance somewhat validates the original signal, as the stock continued to show upward movement. However, the gain was relatively modest, and we'll be watching to see if the stock can build on this momentum. First Service recent acquisition of GSC Fire and Security and Titan Fire Protection through its subsidiary Century Fire Protection is a notable development that could contribute to the company's growth. This acquisition may have played a role in the stock's weekly performance, as investors react positively to the expansion of the company's operations. As we look ahead to next week, viewers should watch for whether FSV.TO can continue its upward trend and if the acquisition news will lead to increased investor interest. We'll be monitoring the stock's movement closely to see if it can break through the $190 mark. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're looking at stock number 7 of 13, MTA.V, where we detected a signal on May 27th. This signal was detected when the stock was trading at $10.09. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal indicated a potential bullish trend, as the short-term moving average crossed above the long-term moving average, combined with a significant increase in trading volume of 155.9%. At the time, the RSI was at 55.8, which is relatively neutral, but the volume surge and Golden Cross suggested a strong buying momentum. This signal suggested that the stock might be poised for a breakout, and traders should take notice of this potential trend reversal. This week, the stock gained 16.2%, opening at $9.34, reaching a high of $10.90, and a low of $9.34, before closing at $10.85. This strong performance validates the original signal, as the stock has continued to trend upwards. The stock's ability to hold its gains and close near its high for the week is a positive sign, indicating that the buying momentum is still present. The overall trend looks bullish, and it will be interesting to see if this momentum can be sustained. Recently, Medalla reported a profitable quarter with higher first-quarter revenue, but the stock actually traded down after hours, which may seem counterintuitive. This could be due to high expectations from investors, and the stock's weekly performance may have already priced in this positive news. Despite this, the company's fundamentals look strong, and this could be a buying opportunity. Looking ahead, viewers should watch for any potential pullbacks or consolidations, as well as the stock's ability to break through any resistance levels. We'll be keeping a close eye on the stock's volume and RSI, to see if the bullish momentum can be sustained. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a look at stock number 8 of 13, BEI-UN.TO, where we detected a signal on May 27th. This signal was a MACD bullish crossover combined with a volume surge, indicating a potential upward trend for the stock. The MACD bullish crossover plus volume surge signal is a strong indicator of a shift in market sentiment, and when we saw this on May 27th, it suggested that buyers were starting to take control of the market. At the time, the RSI was at 43.6, which is relatively neutral, and the volume surge of 64.6% was a clear sign of increased interest in the stock. This combination of factors indicated a potential buying opportunity, and we entered at $64.65. This week, however, the stock declined 1.2%, opening at $64.85, reaching a high of $65.83, and a low of $62.69, before closing at $64.09. Despite this decline, the stock is still holding near our entry price, which could be seen as a validation of the original signal, as it suggests that the buyers who entered at the signal are still supporting the stock. The weekly performance is relatively neutral, and we need to see how the stock will perform in the coming weeks to fully validate the signal. In recent news, Boardwalk Real Estate released their Q1 earnings snapshot, which may have had an impact on the stock's weekly performance. The earnings report could have led to some profit-taking, which would explain the decline we saw this week. However, the report also showed some positive signs, which could support the stock in the long term. As we look ahead to next week, viewers should watch for whether the stock can bounce back from this week's decline and break through the resistance level of $65.83. We'll also be keeping an eye on the overall market sentiment and how it affects BEI-UN.TO. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're reviewing stock number 9 of 13, which is FWZ.V, and a signal was detected on May 20, 2026. This signal was a key indicator for us to take a closer look at this stock, and now we're going to dive into the details. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal that we detected on May 20 indicated a potential trend reversal, as the short-term moving average crossed above the long-term moving average, combined with a significant increase in volume of 47.7%. At the time, the RSI was at 37.9, which suggested that the stock was not overbought, and this signal was a bullish indicator. This signal meant that we could potentially see an uptrend in the stock price, and it was an opportunity for us to get in at an entry price of $4.06. This stock had a pretty good week, gaining 4%. It opened at $4.24, reached a high of $4.55, and a low of $4.03, closing at $4.41. This performance does seem to validate the original signal, as the stock price has continued to move in an upward direction. The stock's ability to hold above the $4 mark is also a positive sign, and we'll be watching to see if it can continue this momentum. In recent news, Fireweed Metals announced plans to raise up to $61.5 million in a private placement of shares, which could provide a significant boost to the company's financial position and potentially lead to further growth. This news could be a key driver of the stock's performance in the coming weeks, and we'll be keeping a close eye on how the market reacts to this announcement. As we look ahead to next week, we'll be watching to see if the stock can continue its upward trend, and if the private placement of shares will have a positive impact on the stock price. We'll also be keeping an eye on the volume and RSI to see if they continue to support the bullish trend. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're reviewing stock number 10 of 13, which is Reg.V, and the signal was detected on May 14, 2026. This signal was a significant one, as it indicated a potential trend reversal in the stock. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal is a strong bullish indicator, where the short-term moving average crosses above the long-term moving average, accompanied by a notable increase in trading volume, in this case, 47.4%. At the time, the RSI was at 48.6, which is relatively neutral, but the volume surge and moving average crossover suggested a potential upward trend. This signal was particularly interesting, as it occurred at an entry price of $4.07. This stock had a solid week, gaining 5.6%, with an opening price of $3.90, reaching a high of $4.12, and a low of $3.89, before closing at $4.12. This performance does seem to validate the original signal, as the stock has continued to trend upward. The stock's ability to close near its high for the week is also a positive sign, indicating that buyers are still interested in the stock. The recent mention of Reg.V in a list of TSX penny stocks to watch in May 2026 likely contributed to the stock's increased visibility and potentially even its upward trend this week. This kind of attention can often lead to more buying activity, as investors become more aware of the stock's potential. The fact that the stock was highlighted as one to watch may have also led to more traders taking an interest in it. As we look ahead to next week, viewers should watch for whether Reg.V can continue its upward trend, and whether it will be able to break through any resistance levels. We'll also be keeping an eye on the stock's volume, to see if it can maintain the elevated levels we saw this week. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a look at stock number 11 of 13, which is SLI.V, and the signal was detected on May 28, 2026. This signal was a key indicator for us to take a closer look at the stock's potential for growth. The MA Golden Cross Plus volume surge signal is a strong indicator of a potential trend reversal, and when we saw this signal, it meant that the stock's short-term moving average had crossed above its long-term moving average, combined with a significant surge in volume, which was up 33.0%. At the time, the RSI was at 52.7, indicating a relatively neutral position, but the volume surge and golden cross signal suggested a potential shift in momentum. This signal was particularly interesting because it suggested that the stock might be poised for a breakout. This stock gained 4.7% this week, which is a pretty strong move, and it's worth noting that it opened at 5.16, reached a high of 5.60, and a low of 5.14, before closing at 5.40. This performance does seem to validate the original signal, as the stock has continued to trend upward. The fact that the stock was able to hold its gains and close near its high for the week is a positive sign. Overall, the stock's weekly performance suggests that the signal was correct in indicating a potential trend reversal. There was a recent headline that caught our attention, which suggested that companies like Standard Lithium are in a strong financial position and can afford to invest in growth, which could be a key driver of the stock's recent performance. This is likely a factor in the stock's ability to trend upward, as investors are becoming more confident in the company's ability to execute on its growth plans. The company's financial health is a key factor in its ability to invest in new projects and drive growth. As we look ahead to next week, we'll be watching to see if the stock can continue its upward trend, and if the volume can remain strong. We'll also be keeping an eye on any news or announcements that could impact the stock's performance, and we'll be looking for any signs of a potential pullback. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a look at stock number 12 of 13, which is ARTG.V, where we detected a signal on May 28. This signal was triggered by a MACD bullish crossover along with a volume surge, indicating a potential buying opportunity. The MACD bullish crossover is a strong indicator of a shift in momentum, and when combined with a volume surge of 66.9%, it suggested that investors were becoming increasingly bullish on the stock. At the time, the RSI was at 41.0, which is relatively neutral, but the volume surge and MACD crossover indicated a potential trend reversal. This signal was particularly interesting because it suggested that the stock was poised for a potential breakout. This week, ARTG.V gained 0.3%, opening at $32.90, reaching a high of $34.20, and a low of $31.23, before closing at $33. This performance is relatively muted, but it does suggest that the original signal was valid, as the stock has managed to hold its ground and even post a small gain. The fact that the stock was able to bounce back from its low of $31.23 is also a positive sign. Overall, the stock's performance this week is a validation of the original signal. In recent news, there's been a lot of discussion around Artemis Gold's valuation, particularly in light of the growth at Blackwater, which is driving some contrasting signals. This news may have contributed to the stock's relatively flat performance this week, as investors weigh the potential risks and rewards of investing in the company. As we look ahead to next week, viewers should watch for any further developments on the valuation front, as well as any updates on the company's operations at Blackwater. We'll also be keeping an eye on the stock's technical indicators to see if the bullish trend continues. Now let's move on to our next stock. We're taking a look at stock OR.TO, where we detected a MACD bullish crossover plus a volume surge signal on May 29. This signal caught our attention as it indicated a potential trend reversal in the stock. The MACD bullish crossover, combined with a volume surge of 31.5%, suggested that buyers were gaining momentum, and the stock was poised for a potential upside move. At the time of the signal, the RSI was at 45.1, which is relatively neutral, but the volume surge and the MACD crossover hinted at a bullish trend. The entry price for this stock was $51.11, which seemed like a good value given the signal. This week, OR.TO gained 3.6%, opening at $49.60, reaching a high of $52.24, and a low of $48.50, before closing at $51.38. This performance somewhat validates the original signal, as the stock did move higher, but it's essential to consider the overall market conditions and other factors that may have influenced the stock's price. The stock's movement this week was relatively steady, with a slight upward bias, which is encouraging. OR Royalties recently reported its first quarter adjusted earnings per share beat, which is a positive development for the company. This earnings beat likely contributed to the stock's weekly gain, as investors reacted positively to the news. The company's strong earnings report suggests that its business is performing well, which could lead to further upside in the stock. Looking ahead to next week, we'll be watching to see if OR.TO can build on its recent gains and continue to move higher. Viewers should keep an eye on the stock's price action and look for any potential pullbacks or breakouts that could signal the next move. That wraps up our weekly review. Subscribe for daily TSX signals from NorthFlow Finance. Thanks for tuning in, subscribe for more, and remember, this is not financial advice, consult a professional before making decisions.